Hello friends, welcome to Doll Art House. So today I'm taking one of my Goodwill dolls and transforming her into Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn. The first order of business is to try to get rid of that green color on her face. So I do this by blushing with some complementary colors like reds and oranges. So once the blushing is done, I can start drawing her features. Now I'm trying to match the character design of Aloy as closely as I can, and she has smaller eyes than the normal dolls that I do. So one of the challenges with this doll was trying to get those eyes clear and defined, but also not have them just grow bigger and bigger as I do the drawing. Aloy also has really full eyebrows, so I put a lot of different layers of color in there, trying to make them feel realistic and, the individual eyebrow hairs, and they're a little bit wild, which I kind of love. So as I'm putting the face on, I'll take breaks periodically to spray a coat of Mr. Super Clear, which does a couple of different things. It protects what you've already done, and it makes it easier to build up color over time. One of the other interesting things about this doll is Aloy, from the pictures that I've been using as my inspiration, it looks like she's got hooded eyes. So I'm trying to sort of indicate that with the light and shadow that I put above her eyelid. And, some of it was successful. Aloy's got really amazing green eyes, and so I wanted to give them dimension by adding highlights and shadows, so I chose a bunch of different greens and yellows to kind of really try to bring them to life. So as the doll starts to come together, I start putting in more highlights and more shadows, and that really helps kind of pull things out and push things back and gives a much more dimensional look to the face. These highlights on the inner corners of the eyes really help to bring the eyes to life. So again, this is me trying to give her the appearance of hooded eyes, and it was a bit of a challenge. The doll's face is not necessarily molded to be supportive of that, but you never know until you try. So I'm drawing the face on with watercolor pencils, and as the pigment is building up and it's not doing exactly what I want it to do, I add just a little bit of water to kind of help smooth things out. I also find the water to be really helpful getting into little nooks and crannies like the line between the lips. So as you can tell, it's really just about going over and over again, building up color, trying to pull the highlights forward, push the shadows back. I know there are some people that can do this perfectly the first time through, but for me, I'm much more of a revise and adjust and redo until I get the look that I'm going for. So we're into sort of the final detail pass here. I go back, I check everything, I darken the darks that I really want dark, I brighten the highlights, and give her a little bit of blush where she needs it. And then when all that's done, I give her some freckles. So once I'm satisfied with how her face is coming out, it's time for eyelights and lower lashes. And this is just about it for her face. So I try to get a lot of my dolls from Goodwill. I like the idea of keeping them out of landfills and giving them a second life, but there are some issues. And so I try to work around them. With this doll, I knew her costume was going to cover her shoulder. But that didn't stop me from blushing her entire body anyway. Just like with her head, I blushed the body with complementary colors like oranges and reds to help knock down some of that green. It's also good to make sure the head and body match. Now it's on to the hair. So I really like making hair out of yarn because it has a really fine texture and it's also sort of posable. I had this yarn lying around at home, and while it might technically be a little bit too bright to use as Aloy's hair, I do have a plan, so we're gonna see if this works out. Plus, it's COVID and I'm not going out. So I really like this method of making a wig. It's basically, you put plastic wrap down and then you build wefts together with a base of Mod Podge. And when you're done, let the Mod Podge dry and it forms a really nice wig cap that fits the doll's head really well. There's definitely something really soothing about doing this process. I quite enjoy it. I added a bit of puffier hair in the middle of Aloy's wig because it is kind of like she's got this wild, untamed mane, and I wanted to make sure it had enough volume. Also, I'm putting the bangs on pretty thick this way because I know her hair is going to be tied back. So with her hair done, it's time to move on to the costume. I'm making this doll with fabric that I have lying around the house from other projects. This is a brown felt that I thought would be really great for her base costume, her pants, and the shirt that she wears under her vest. I made a pattern by cutting up a pair of Monster High doll pants and trying to match it. And for the most part, it was pretty successful. So the problem that I ran into is this fabric is really stretchy, which is awesome if you're making clothing for human beings, but it can lead to some challenges if you're making clothes for little tiny dolls. So once I finished the pants, I knew I was going to have to do some trimming up. It took a couple of tries, but I finally got the pants to fit her pretty well. Then I move on to her shirt. And instead of trying to hem the head opening, I just glued it down with Fabri-Tac glue. Once the shirt was finished, I moved on to her vest. There's a detail on the base of her vest that I really liked, and it wasn't too complicated to do just with some embroidery thread. So I feel like the really defining piece about Aloy's costume is her skirt that's made up of all these different tabs of fabric. So I started by creating the tabs and then painting the borders rather than trying to sew them on because that just would be madness. This was also oddly satisfying. Once I finished painting the first side, I flipped them over and painted the back side as well. The panel is attached to this red sash that she wears around her waist. Aloy has a lot of fur details on her costume. I had an old piece of faux fur laying around, and so I figured, well, I'll use that. For the most part, it worked pretty well. I just used Fabri-Tac glue to attach the fur to the base of her pants. The one problem was that the fur was a little bit long, so I had to kind of give it a haircut all the way around. She's also got a bit of fur on the back of the vest. And there's a little bit of fur on each one of her bracers. Aloy also has these leather calf shields. I'm not sure what you would call them, but she's got one on each leg, and they're both different. The bracers have a lot of little details on them. there's sort of a piece of hide that goes on over the fur, and then there's another piece that goes on over that, but I had to wait for the glue to dry first, so I moved on to making some of her jewelry. After I finished a couple of necklaces, I went back to the second leg shield and started painting on the design. So for Aloy's shoes, I needed to find some boots, and I just happened to have a pair of Monster High doll shoes that had this really cute little booty shape, but they came attached to this giant platform heel. So I got out my X-Acto knife and I cut off the platform heels. Now Aloy's costume has a bunch of tiny little details, like there are little pieces of armor that go over her bracers. She wears a piece of armor over one of her knees. She's got a couple of little leather pouches. So I figured the best way to deal with all of these would be to use some epoxy sculpt. And while I had the epoxy sculpt out, I also formed some new soles for her boots. I definitely love having reference images to work off of. One of the things I really like about Aloy's costume is all the tiny little details that go with it. It's just, they can be time consuming, but it's fun, especially when you see it starting to come together. Once I had everything sculpted, it was time to start painting. So I gave her shoes and the leather satchels a sort of a dark kind of blackish greenish base coat, and her armor pieces got sort of a grayish bluish base coat. And here they are. Now, Aloy also wears this sort of turquoise colored scarf, and it has these awesome folds in it, which are a little bit hard to mimic when you're using a sort of a stiff cotton material on a small scale. But there's a really cool trick I learned where you can essentially mold the folds into a scarf using Fabri-Tac glue if you glue it down onto another piece of fabric. So this is kind of like a combination between sewing and sculpting. And when it's done, it looks pretty good. So now it's time to start styling Aloy's hair. I attach the hair to the head with more Fabri-Tac glue. Aloy has sort of a big hair twist in the front of her head and a bunch of little braids. So the first order of business was to try to get that hair swirl right. And then I started working on the little braids. So I start brushing in some darker pastels to try to sort of tone down the orange of her hair and give it a little bit more dimension. And when everything's said and done, I think she looks pretty good. So now it's time to see the whole doll put together. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll consider subscribing and liking. That would really help out. And hopefully we'll be back with some more videos really soon. In the meantime, I hope you stay healthy and safe. Bye.